to Contesting Wrestling, a podcast where we talk about the things that fans love and other people just don't understand about the world's most prominent form of simulated combat. My name is Evan Burke. I'm a writer. I have been friends with my two co-hosts for decades. They love wrestling. They've dedicated their lives to wrestling. One of them is literally a professional wrestler. I don't care for it, and I'm baffled by it, but I also respect them, so I'm trying to, reconcile these two things, and they are trying to get me to appreciate wrestling and to understand it. And they should introduce themselves so you can understand why there's some gravitas behind that.
My name is Doc Diamondfire. I am a professional wrestler. I've been in the business for about 10 years. I've done wrestling, commentary, ring announcing, a little bit of everything. I love Evan. I was very happy when he had this idea. And I'm happy to show him my world a little bit in painstaking detail as we pick apart things episode after episode.
I love you too, Doc.
I am Dr. Ben Abelson. I am a professor of philosophy at Mercy College. I am partial to professional wrestling, and I ooze gravitas.
Should get that checked out.
Yeah, not sure what it is.
Wipe it? Wipe it?
But then it just keeps oozing.
It's a kind of a reach, but when I say wipe it, I'm referencing Spike Dudley and Beyond the Mat when he's doing that interview and he just won't stop bleeding from the face. And he pauses and he looks up to where the doctor's talking to him muffled off camera and he's like, what wipe it? Okay, and then he wipes off his face, the blood, and then his face is just covered in blood again.
A, good save.
Yeah.
B, horrifying story.
When I say I'm oozing stuff, I am referencing Razor Ramon, who oozed machismo.
He did.
And then Gorilla Monsoon would be like, "Hey, he's oozing something."
I feel like in a very macho sport, in a macho setting, like to be the guy who is the most macho, that he oozes it. We don't normally say the word ooze this much on this podcast, so if this is the first time you're tuning in, don't worry.
Contesting Wrestling, the secret of the ooze.
That will be our sequel podcast where we talk about the original Ninja Turtles movies for hundreds of episodes. Today, all right, look, so we've been doing this for a little while now. We've been doing this for several episodes. I've watched some wrestling. I've learned things about the world of the WWE. I've seen the effects that it can have on people over the years. And I realized before we can move forward, before I can try to understand anything else about the WWE, before I can understand anything else about professional wrestling, there is one man who is at the center of all of it. Vincent
Kennedy
McMahon. Vincent Kennedy McMahon, a true figure, a nightmare figure, a Satan-like / business genius / arguably ultimate artist. Arguably, in some ways, the most committed artist who has ever lived.
His genius is appreciated, but it won't really be appreciated until he's dead.
I'll tell you, when I was about 10 years old and we had to recite the Pledge of Allegiance in school, I would pledge allegiance to the flag of the World Wrestling Federation, one promotion under Vince McMahon. Like, that was, I believed. I was a true
Was that
believer.
an official piece of, wrestling stuff that was out there, or was that a choice that you made independently?
I made that choice independently because it sickened me to recite the actual Pledge of Allegiance.
I mean, that's a good instinct. Don't
I was
fight that,
already
yeah.
a budding, revolutionary or whatever.
I find that interesting, considering how much of the WWE product and the WWF product when you were a kid was ultra patriotic to America.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, if anything represents what's wrong with the US, the WWF does.
Vince McMahon is, I respect him more than Donald Trump, but there's obviously a lot of overlap in their personality.
They're good buddies.
Oh yeah, and we don't generally get extremely political on this podcast, but I mean, you can take a stab in the dark that we're not huge fans of insane businessmen abusing their workers for decades.
No, definitely not. Vince and Trump have some parallels for sure. And yeah, Trump hosted WrestleMania at one of his casinos in WrestleMania 4 and WrestleMania 5. That's correct. Yeah. That's and
he also performed in a later WrestleMania.
Performed at a later WrestleMania. He kind of got there were some like think pieces around when Trump was elected. Like, guys, I think Trump might be a wrestler, and people in wrestling are like, yeah. We saw that as soon as he started coming on television. He had actually had a really good act. If you ever watched The Apprentice, he was the heel boss. He was essentially doing Vince McMahon. And as long as that's, confined to 9 p.m. on NBC or whatever, it's fine.
It seems like, in a lot of ways, we're almost lucky that Vince McMahon was raised to only really care about wrestling. Because was he to choose to direct his power and his evil genius outward towards the rest of the world, well, maybe it wouldn't be that successful because the XFL crashed and burned, and he's about to try to do it again.
And his wife Linda ran for the Senate and did not win.
But then she's in Trump's cabinet now,
yeah,
right?
She was the head of the Small Business Administration for Trump. She resigned that post only so she could get started on his 2020 campaign. Jesus Christ. Now this whole it was really trippy when like they're doing the Senate confirmation of all the cabinet posts, and like Triple H and Stephanie McMahon are sitting there in the audience.
Fucking casts a pall over this entire endeavor now for me. This is difficult.
It is hard, I think, for a lot of wrestling fans. Whatever criticisms we had of the WWE, they've become like way more pointed and difficult for us to resolve our fandom with in the last few years, for sure. Especially with the Saudi Arabia thing too.
Oh God!
In the interest of fairness, to use a wrestling quote, Linda's political career has always really pointedly been not in the WWE. As soon as she started running for Senate, she resigned from the WWE. They never plug her on television. I think maybe they did once right before one of her elections. Vince has gone on record several times saying that he hates real politic, if you will. I'd say he doesn't want the show to be political, but they sure do a lot of like patriotic stuff on the show. But that was, that was kind of par for the course, especially in the 80s. I'm not saying Vince isn't wholeheartedly endorsing Linda. Of course he is. They're married. He has a spot, if he wants, in America.
I mean, I think they're also concerned to keep the Senate friendly, or to keep the federal government friendly.
They did have a lot of trouble with the government in the 90s.
And also in the 2000s after the Benoit murder-suicide, the Senate was looking into, use of steroids and general treatment of the workers and all the stuff that they really should be investigating. And so, the McMahons definitely want to hold that off as much as they can.
We watched 5 matches for this. We broke with the pattern just a little bit. Because I feel like if you really want to get to know somebody, if you really want to take a peek inside of a man's mind, you should watch him fight his children, his future son-in-law, a man with one leg half his size, and God.
And we get all of those things.
Yeah. So that's
in the match is chosen for today. So let's just start. The official good match for this episode is Vince McMahon versus his son Shane McMahon at WrestleMania X7 or 17, if you have a fully functioning brain.
It's called X7, Ben. They always refer to it as X7. That's the name of the event.
And then the bad match is Vince McMahon against his daughter, Stephanie McMahon, at No Mercy 2003. But there are 3 other matches that we watched that fall somewhere in between, I think, good and bad.
Well, just to color Vince in a little bit as a performer.
So first there was the match between Vince McMahon and the one-legged Zach Gowen at Vengeance 2003, a few months before the Stephanie match. Then in 2006, we get 2 matches involving Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels, who feuded for pretty much that whole year. One of them, Vince McMahon teaming with his son Shane against Shawn Michaels and God. Yes, that's right. That's what it says on the WWE Network.
In a real wasted opportunity of a match that should have been a million times cooler than it was. Yeah. But Vince, that's the thing. Vince couldn't actually have something in the match that was cooler than him or took the attention away. Vince is always the center of attention.
Right. The whole point of that match is that he is actually better than God.
Yes.
Right.
It would have been so easy just to have lightning strike him in the they could have done so much with it, and then he still could have won. And there was just I was really shocked at how flat it was.
And then we'll get into that more later in that year at Unforgiven 2006. We have Degeneration X of Shawn Michaels and Triple H battling Vince McMahon, Shane McMahon, and The Big Show in Hell in a Cell, which, for those who don't know, is a giant steel cage with a roof on it. That's been the host for some of the most bloody, brutal matches in WWE history.
What are the rules of a Hell in a Cell match?
It's basically no holds barred.
Yeah, pinfall or submission to win, nothing else.
You're supposed to not be able to escape the cage. Though, in even the first two ever Hell in a Cell matches, they escape the cage.
They always escape the cage. It's a thing.
But they get their faces rubbed on the cage and bloodied and slammed into it. There's usually a lot of other weapons under the ring that are now trapped with them in the cage that they can use on each other.
At first glance, it's impressive that Vince, goes into these matches, gets cut up, gets injured, gets his face pressed into the Big Show's asshole. Like,
his bloody face pressed into the Big Show's completely bare.
Yeah, actually naked.
Yes.
Ass.
After he had been wrestling for 15 minutes, sweating and, you know.
Yes.
So he does all of that. And at first glance, it's very impressive. But I used to work for a national grocery store chain that has a very positive attitude. And my boss at the time would do this thing where he'd hop on register for a couple hours, or he'd go and clean the bathroom, and he'd do all this stuff, and it kind of made you feel at first like, oh, that's so cool. The boss is, he's not above any of this. He gets down and dirty with the rest of us, and da-da-da-da. But he's still making, it fucking 20 times what everybody else is making, and it's just a goddamn show to keep everybody, so he says to people, I'm sure, oh, well, I'm not asking you to do anything that I wouldn't do. It's like, well, yeah, you kind of are, because you're asking them to do it for a pittance, and you are worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, fair enough, except that Vince, he is very, very rich, and he's making a whole lot of money. But damn, I don't know. He must enjoy himself in some way, and God knows, probably really horrible ways that we don't want to know about at all. But at the same time, he does work harder than anybody else. The man, from all reports, never leaves his feet all day.
I've worked for guys like that where they have utterly given themselves over to what they do. There is no meaningful boundary. Guys who they can't go on vacation. They can't. They don't ever stop working. Their whole life is work. And obviously, I've never worked for anybody who it's as true for them as it is for Vince.
Yeah.
And there's always this attitude of well, I do that. Why can't you do that? And they have a true inability to understand why nobody else is doing this, and why people, and there's a frustration that can't. And then we glorify that in this country. For the most part, and that's a lot of jobs I've worked where people it's time to rise and grind. It's no, you're making fucking $9 an hour for I don't know. Sorry, it's Labor Day when we're recording this. I should point out.
Labor Day.
McMahon certainly has a kind of ruthlessness in business that we do exalt in this country.
Certainly,
for better or worse.
What is his background?
His father was a wrestling promoter.
Okay.
Well, can I give some background on Vince from
Yes,
the beginning?
go ahead.
Because everyone, his father was a wrestling promoter. His
And his
grandfather was a wrestling and boxing promoter in New York. But there's more to it than that. His father and his mother separated when he was a baby. His mother took him, and his father did not. She lived in North Carolina. He lived for the first, 12 or 13 years of his life as a poor, trailer park boy in North Carolina. That's one more thing that separates him from a guy like Trump, by the way. When Vince was a little kid, he wasn't conditioned to think, I'm going to run the biggest wrestling company in the country or the world. He was conditioned to think, well, I need to grow up and get a job. He didn't even call himself Vince McMahon as a name until he was a teenager. Because why would he identify with his father that he'd never met other than as a baby? Then eventually he met his father. He moved up, to the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. and started working for him there. Vince wanted to be a wrestler. He thought it was the coolest stuff ever, and his father said no.
How old is Vince exactly? And
He's 74 now, so this would be in the 60s when Vince was a teenager.
So, by the way, he was just over 60 during all of these matches.
Damn, I hope my ass looks like that when I'm 60, man. Jesus.
Work out 6 days a week at 4 in the morning like Vince does. And you can talk about whatever like supplementation he may be on or not. You don't get a body like that without working on it all the time.
I actually would not be surprised if I learned that Vince had never taken steroids and he just looks like that because he's just been working out 6 days a week.
Apparently all he eats
18.
is protein.
Yeah.
His farts are things of legend. People will openly be like, Vince will get you in the car, roll the windows up, fart, and be like, how do you like that? I only eat protein. It's like,
God, what a fucking...
Right?
He hid those muscles under his like silly polyester suit all those years that he was just an announcer before he came out as the public head of the company, which is really interesting that for years when we were watching him as children, he was just the announcer guy who, was like kind of a dork and, the wrestlers didn't really respect him.
He was fully aware of that, too. He didn't want his character to be front and center. When he was a kid, he wanted to be a wrestler. His father said no, and all the other promoters wouldn't take Vince McMahon's kid, Vince McMahon Sr., that is, would want him to do it. So he became a businessman, and he was smart enough to the business to know that especially when he started being an announcer in the 70s, you don't want the attention to go on the announcer. You want the attention to go on the guys. You want the attention to go on Andre the Giant, who's clearly much bigger than you,
It seems like it's kind of the best way to be part of the show and have the most control over the show without being the point of the show.
Though he was terrible as an announcer.
He has a lot of critics, that's for sure.
He told the story well enough, I suppose, but he had a lot of obnoxious tics and things like that.
Yes, very much so.
He got him. No, he didn't.
I don't know when it occurred to him, but he is the ultimate villain. There is no way you could have
there's an answer
more of a villain.
There's a clear answer to when that happened, though. It wasn't just one day he was like, I'm going to put myself on the show. It all stems really back to the Bret Hart thing. They started walking the line with Bret Hart talking directly to Vince McMahon, like, well, this is your show, why aren't I on it? And Vince would be sitting at ringside like, I'm an announcer. And, when Bret Hart was leaving the company and they did the Montreal screw job, which, if you have 5 more hours, we can analyze. It's been analyzed more than the Kennedy assassination,
As a podcast nerd, I have listened to the Radio Lab episode about that.
The short version is it was Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels. Bret was the champion. They told Bret there would be a DQ and then he could leave, and they didn't. Vince got up, signaled to the ref, and the ref said ring the bell, and they handed the belt to Shawn and told him to get the hell out of there real quick. And that was that. And everybody knew it. And after that, Vince would come out and everyone would hate him. So they were like, let's just go with it.
Apparently, he did try out being a heel down in Memphis.
Yes. Have you
seen
any of that?
I saw that. Yeah.
That's great.
But anyway, that was sort of a proto kind of thing.
But anyway, Vince came on television like a couple of weeks later and just explained very calmly, and at the time was a big breach of like kayfabe, but it was done so well. He was just like, there's a long tradition in this business of doing the right thing for the company when you're leaving on the way out. Bret Hart did not adhere to those traditions. I have no sympathy for Bret. I didn't screw Bret. Bret screwed Bret. And from then to today, Vince has been the biggest villain in wrestling anytime he wants to be.
He's the greatest heel of all time. And so great of a heel that actually I think he's sort of stunted the wrestling business. They can't seem to get past this evil authority figure storyline that was created because of him. And whether it's his son Shane, his daughter Stephanie, his son-in-law Triple H, or like Vicky Guerrero, or whatever other evil authority figure they can drum up in his place, it's pretty much still just the evil Vince story over and over again.
I feel like to get out of it, they would have to have a storyline where all of the McMahons die in story, and then they install like a new fictional family while the McMahons then like never appear in public again. Like, it's impossible. They are doomed to be the villains in this story forever.
They did kill Vince once, and they put him in a coma another time. They had to abruptly drop the Vince McMahon's limo blew up angle when 2 weeks later Chris Benoit murdered his family and killed himself. And all of a sudden, that kind of an angle was just not going to fly. It's one of the few times they just
killed Vince in the story. They didn't kill him in real life, and then he rose from the dead with his powers.
I realize I have to
happen.
specify these things. So that really put a damper on the angle. It's one of the few angles they just straight dropped. 1 week it was happening, the focal point of the show. The next week, they never mentioned it again.
The McMahon family seems very comfortable to maintain that position for the rest of time. And in fact, they've done a lot in recent years to continually make themselves the biggest stars on the show. They kind of won't even let any of the individual wrestlers become bigger than them or more important to them because they're afraid of them leaving and taking their fans with them.
Let's look at the McMahon family, right? Like we've talked about Vince. Mm-hmm. There was Shane McMahon, who I know for a fact, without having to look it up, has a SoundCloud where he releases his hip-hop albums. I feel like Shane thinks that dancing he does is cool. I think that he thinks unironically that he looks cool. And I feel like my heart goes out to, there's like a handful of black employees at the WWE who Shane McMahon definitely is that guy who goes out of his way to find them and be like, "What's up, my man?" and gives him like a fist bump. And then the guy's like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, I gotta fucking be nice to this guy because he's my boss." That is Shane McMahon, and I will not accept any revision of this impression of him.
I mean, I have nothing to contest any of that.
I don't know that that's inaccurate at all, no.
No, I know that dance that he does, he got directly from The Rock's father, who used to do that dance. And when Shane was a little boy, he had him show him how to do it.
This is all supporting my theory.
And people definitely think that's cool, though. Like wrestling fans. People, you know. I'm using scare quotes
That's
here.
very strong language.
I don't think they think it's cool anymore. I think they thought it was cool when Shane started doing it in the late 90s.
Well,
Shane
now,
thinks it's cool.
just to
Shane
talk
thinks it's
about
cool, yes.
current wrestling for a moment, he's made himself into an incredible heel just in recent months.
Yeah, of course.
This might be dated at this point, but I thought at the time of recording this that he should be the one to beat Kofi Kingston for the WWE title.
I mean, that would
because
be
it would
real
get
heat.
so much heat.
He does seem like he's dedicated, like he seems like he's a good wrestler.
And he can
does
do
well.
anything.
Yeah.
He can do anything anyone can do. The big dive that you see him do at the end, the Van Shanenator or whatever you...
No,
Well, Vince versus Shane then at WrestleMania X7, Professor. I consider this to be kind of the greatest WWE style hardcore match that's ever been. You know, it has everything. It has a million, random weapons. It has a bunch of side players all playing their parts perfectly. It has a ridiculous soap opera story that makes sense in the context of everything.
I'm sure that on a personal level, because I definitely think that Mr. McMahon is Vince McMahon's true self.
Right.
And he only can be his true self in that moment when he's Mr. McMahon. So I'm sure for Shane, he's experiencing a lot of complicated feelings, only being able to meet his real father in these kinds of contexts.
Ones in which his mother is ostensibly comatose at ringside in a wheelchair, being wheeled around by Vince's mistress at the time, who was Trish Stratus, the great Trish Stratus.
But we find out she wasn't comatose because Trish didn't drug her.
Right.
Which
made Trish a great hero and kind of catapulted her into stardom in the next few years.
And I will say this match, if this is the good match and the him versus Stephanie is the bad match, this does a good job of being like, he's a monster to his family in a way that's comical, in a way that's like over the top, in a way that,
it's entertaining.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very entertaining. You can get behind. Whereas the match with Stephanie was just like 10 minutes of a guy beating the shit out of his daughter. Like, with all the artifice, with all the silliness of wrestling, like, if you forget about that, like, I was watching and I just got really sad.
Once he's hitting her with the steel pipe, especially.
Yeah. She comes back a little bit and I was like, this is great. This is going to be great. She's going to beat the shit out of him. He'll be bleeding away. No, he turns it around and just and
just chokes her out with the freaking pipe until her mom has to throw in the towel.
And
her actual mother.
And like, even if it's, sure, they're acting, and
Yeah.
and Stephanie was, I'm sure, 100% on board for. Well, actually, I don't know who.
Oh, no,
Who knows how
Stephanie-
much anybody is on board with anything?
Stephanie was on board. Stephanie wanted at this point to just to prove to Vince that it was her, not Shane, that was going to take the
Well, yeah,
company.
I feel
she
like-
has proven that, and that's what's happening.
Apparently,
now.
the only storyline idea that, and they talk about this in the McMahon DVD that WWE put out, the only storyline idea that Triple H and Stephanie were not down for was an incestuous thing. I think it was supposed to be between Vince and Stephanie.
Oh, I
Yeah,
bet,
I'm
I bet
sure it
Vince,
was.
I bet Vince pitches that every couple of years.
yeah,
Like, it's like, hey,
apparently, yes.
hey,
that was
you
a big
guys-
theme of the DVD.
Well, you
guys
watch
wanna
him
do
break.
you guys want to do the have you thought about it some more? No. Okay.
No,
well, maybe
Vince.
We'll try again. We'll try again in 2020.
Maybe when you're 100, because then it would be like interesting on a different level, I think.
I mean, he'll probably still have a great ass.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, he'll still be doing 1,000 squats a day, I'm sure.
and giant
So-
grapefruits.
To explain a little bit the difference between the two matches in terms of like the character, those 2 years between these two matches were some very eventful years. Like WrestleMania X7 is the victory party at the end of the Monday Night War. WCW had folded a few weeks before WrestleMania X7, and that was that. They were at the peak of their popularity, period. The millions of people were watching every week.
Many people regard that as the greatest WrestleMania of all time.
Yeah, I love to watch it. It's great. It has a variety of matches. It's, go watch WrestleMania X7 if you want a good time. Over the next 2 years, they did almost nothing but lose fans. And because they just kept pushing in the direction that they were going. But you can't just do that. Culture has changed. Society was starting to move away from that. It peaked in the early 2000s and then it kind of dissipated. And it's like, there is a point where you get too extreme. It's, rock turns into metal, turns into death metal, turns into grindcore. It's all essentially the same thing at its core, but like, would you rather go see Metallica or would you rather go see Bleeding Pustules? Bleeding Pustules will no doubt be louder and faster, but I'd rather watch Vince versus Shane than Vince versus Stephanie.
There's a point at which, especially if you're working in something where you can't have a lot of nuance to the story, or at least Vince doesn't think you can have a lot of nuance to the story. I bet you can have wrestling storylines with a lot more nuance, and Vince just doesn't trust the fans to be smart.
Well, either he doesn't trust the fans to be smart, or he doesn't trust enough of the fans to be smart, and he wants to bring in, that extra breadth of audience that isn't going to be able to follow anything more complicated.
A lot of the time in the WWE, like it kind of punishes you for paying close attention over time, which was fine 20 years ago, but now not so much. With
Everyone's paying much more attention.
right, there are fewer fans now, and the fans that are there now are spending more money each and expecting a better product.
So a couple of things about these two matches. For one thing, I think it is interesting and telling that for this big victory party, as Doc said, Vince doesn't have himself come out victorious. He loses to his son in that victory party. Instead of, coming out on TV and being like, I am the Lord of all wrestling, he had Shane in the storyline by WCW and become his competition.
It's one of the greatest angles of all time is that I'll tell Evan this, the night that WCW Nitro was having its last episode, wrestling fans knew that it was changing, but nobody really knew that Vince was going to buy WCW until a couple of days before that Monday. And then they simulcast Raw and Nitro so that the same thing was on both shows for periods. There was a last Nitro at a venue. There were like matches with the WCW guys. But Vince was on both shows like, I have the future in my hands. I've vanquished my competition. I beat Ted Turner. The paperwork is done. And I'm going to sign the paperwork at WrestleMania. And then Shane comes out at the WCW venue and says, nope, already bought it. Ha! And we were still hooked. We wanted to see what happened next. And then it shows Vince's face like, no, vanquished again.
Yeah. For all his megalomania, Vince knows that he can't be too completely victorious. He can't be too dominant. He has to have a challenger of some sort.
His megalomania doesn't manifest in the sense of him having to put himself in the center of the show. It's not about him like, oh, I'm going to make myself the champion all the time. Like, that's not what it is.
Yeah, he only did that once.
But it's that the whole thing the whole thing is still his vision, right? Like you're saying, you were saying that
Right.
there are stories about the writing staff, spends a whole week on the script, and then Vince comes in the day they're going to shoot and says, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to do this whole bit about butts instead.
Sometimes he'll just say, I don't like the script. Come up with another one the day of the show.
I don't even have anything to offer. That is a true boss move, and I mean boss as
Yeah,
a pejorative sense.
definitely.
Right there. That is what every boss I've ever had. It's like, oh, that's not what you're supposed to do. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what you should do. I'm just going to say it's not that.
I mean, they have 30 writers. Anything you've ever seen that's had 30 writers is good, right?
Oh yeah, every single time. We just watched
Yeah.
Aquaman, and they were like, there's like 9 people have a writing credit on that movie, and it is trash.
So speaking of credits,
That's on fire, but it's underwater. It's still on fire.
It's still on fire.
It's garbage.
That's impressive.
Jason Momoa was great. Wasted in that movie. Sorry. It should be in space. That's what I don't understand. They act like it's space, but it's not space. It's the ocean, which is less cool than space. Okay, I'm done.
So speaking of space and taking it up, the woman in the Stephanie match who's in Vince McMahon's corner
Yes.
Oh, Sable.
is Sable, who was quite a performer in her own day. She was never
Is
really
that what
that
you're
good of
gonna
a
call it?
wrestler.
Performer.
Yeah. So she
She knows how to stand there.
came into the business. She came into the business married to a guy named Mark Merrow, who we will almost certainly never do a spotlight episode on.
He is a wrestler of no consequence.
I had
no
a little
consequence.
consequence.
Very little consequence. And she left the business married to Brock Lesnar.
She lives with him now and their kids in his compound or whatever in Saskatchewan. They lived in rural Minnesota, and he thought it was too crowded, so they moved to Saskatchewan. To quote Chris Jericho, nobody moves to Saskatchewan. No, Brock Lesnar, you can't call Brock Lesnar. If you want to talk to him on the phone, you have to send him a message and make an appointment to talk to him.
Like take a dog sled or something.
Yeah, something like that, because he just doesn't like people, and he's made enough money and enough of an impact, and like whatever, he's not using his impact to take over the world. He's like, I have an enormous farm and ranch. Leave me alone.
You have to communicate with me by eagle.
Yeah. Send the majestic beast, something that can best me in battle.
If you want to talk to me, you have to defeat me and a griffin.
Oh, boy.
And it's a really jacked griffin.
Yeah, it's not. This is not a weak griffin like you're imagining, listeners.
Right.
This is.
You think you're imagining a strong griffin? That's the weak one.
Yeah. This guy's he can do squats.
So just to give Sable credit where it's due, she was the women's champion. I think she
Sure.
brought the title back after it hadn't existed for a while. They
Is
brought it
that
back
how they did that?
for her. I don't.
Oh,
remember.
that's really too bad.
Guys,
Man.
when it comes to like 98 to 2000, like I wasn't really paying attention a little bit. So I know that's the time that you all like, that like wrestling was really popular, but it wasn't for me.
Alundra Blaze was such a good wrestler, and they just couldn't get her over, and the women's title over at the time, and then she dumped it in the trash, and the way they brought women's wrestling back was just so sad. I'm glad it's not like that anymore.
Stephanie seems to, because I saw her during the Sasha Bailey match, right? That was Stephanie McMahon?
Yes.
And so, she seems like she's got some power again in the storyline.
Oh, for a
whatever.
long time, she was the primary evil authority figure.
Oh, you mentioned something at some point like that her and Triple H are the ones going to be running the company, not Shane. But
Yeah.
Shane still wrestles.
Shane left the company for about a decade. He moved he was moving
to
back
pursue
and
his
forth.
rap career.
No, he went
I
to
think he had,
China
like,
to start some kind of VOD business.
Didn't
that
he have like a
failed.
car dealership or something?
I don't think he had a car dealership.
I
Well, in any
feel
case,
like he had a car dealership.
he tried to start some kind of media company in China, and it failed. It's the kind of thing that really rich businessmen's kids can spend 10 years doing to learn how to do their thing. But he kind of left once he realized that Stephanie was going to beat him, because, everyone thought, oh, surely Shane, it'd be the fourth male McMahon in the line. But Stephanie took to the business better, and Vince saw that and was like, no, her. she's clearly, they call her the Vincess because she's very much like Vince McMahon. Oh yeah,
she's the Cersei Lannister to Shane's Jaime, except
They're not banging.
Except they're not banging.
I hope not. Well,
As
anyway,
far as we know, they're not banging.
as far as we know.
She seems like she's better than that.
Yeah.
Like that, Jaime Lannister had a lot going for him, whereas Shane's just like, he's like, oh, what's up? I'm Shane. I don't know if that's what he sounds like, but that's just what he looks like.
I think that's what he sounds like.
I'm Shane McMahon, my car dealership. Can we do that
Stephanie.
again? Can we take that again? No, okay. I'm Shane McMahon. I'll sell you car. Oh fuck! Dad was right. Dad was right.
See, Stephanie is the same kind of evil that Vince is. I don't think Shane is quite the same kind of evil that Vince is. Stephanie, as an executive, is the one that put forward the initiative of, in order to raise the profile of our company and make way more money, we should do charity work and altruism, because then we'll make more money. And I never heard any business person publicly say that as blatantly as she did it. And honestly, the end result is they do a ton of charity work. A bunch of, children
Make-A-Wish.
get happy. They're the biggest Make-A-Wish. John Cena has done more Make-A-Wish, kids than anybody.
But then there's also that Susan G. Komen scam, and
Yeah, but Komen, I got a lot of problems with
the Komen
as a
people are gonna
charity,
come
but
after me.
But they're a legitimate charity as far as anybody's concerned. If they got the pink ribbon, if you want, for a month, they make their, middle rope pink or something.
and all the merch has pink editions, and
Yeah.
I mean, regardless of how much they're helping or anything like that, I doubt Stephanie McMahon. There's no way you can be a 4th generation wrestling promoter and still have a true internal value for human life.
definitely not.
No, I don't think so. No, Triple H, I think, has more of a value of her human life than she does.
Maybe.
He at least had to, climb the ranks.
He at least has camaraderie with the other wrestlers
Yeah.
and stuff.
That's a big thing.
So this match that we watched in 2006, the Hell in the Cell,
Oh, yeah.
where Vince was Triple H part of the family at this point?
Oh yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, they were fighting as father and son-in-law.
Triple H was not kayfabe part of management yet. So he
Okay.
was actually officially on the creative team and stuff, but he hadn't come out as the COO or whatever they say he is.
D-Generation X, named so in 2006, a time when the vast majority of Generation X had aged out of liking wrestling, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And they themselves, Triple H and Shawn Michaels, had aged out of being the sort of
Degeneration
people
X.
who should be Degeneration
Yeah.
X.
Well, they were a nostalgia act at that time. The peak of DX was 97, and then their careers had separated. Shawn took a few years off. Triple H
Became a born-again
huge star. Yeah,
Shawn became a born-again Christian.
right. And that colors a lot of the later DX stuff, which is a lot more tame.
He looks uncomfortable making the suck it gesture. He looks
Yeah.
both of them do it in a way. Shawn seems like I shouldn't be doing this anymore, and Triple H seems like he's like I'm too old to tell somebody to suck it. I mean, I can't be doing this.
It made perfect sense, and it was very congruent with the cool society in 1997.
They'd have Triple H by that point, they'd have Triple H say the really bad lines. And Shawn would act kind of ashamed. But, I don't believe for a second that Shawn is ashamed of goddamn anything. But
No, Shawn Michaels? No.
he still comes out to, I'm a sexy boy.
Yeah, and I bet he believes it.
You're right. God made me such a sexy boy.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the bit where Triple H does the suck it gesture and then makes a move, but it seems like the final move is to do the suck it gesture and then jump near your opponent, because he does the suck it gesture and then jumps and lands not.
Oh,
and
the knee
lands
drop.
yes,
The famous
Right.
Triple H Harley race knee drop. He completely missed.
yeah,
completely.
in a way where I was just like I didn't realize, because I was like, oh, I guess this is going to be a finisher. Oh no, maybe it's leading up to something else, and then so that was just a
At
botch.
least Vince doesn't sell it. He just stays there. It's
Yeah.
he might have gotten hit. He might not. Might
It's
have
realistic that somebody misses a move. It's not realistic when somebody misses a move and then the person they were supposed to hit goes flying across the ring.
not. That match is interesting.
Yeah, I don't want to necessarily say it's a great match or anything, but it's fine.
It did have my favorite moment that I've seen in any wrestling so far. It's the moment right after Shane McMahon kicks the trash can into Triple H's ear, and the camera comes up on Triple H, and it's there, and then the Big Show comes behind him and mocks him for bleeding from the ear.
Yeah, he
basically.
like points at his ear.
He has this look on his face. He's like, oh, you're bleeding. Oh, like a sucker. Yeah, you suck. Oh, little baby boy's bleeding.
The Big Show is a really underrated entertainer for moments like that.
I have to say, I had never seen him wrestle before. It does seem like how can anybody convincingly beat him?
Well, yeah, that's one of the things about being that big. One of the main things that separates him, like, he's probably the second greatest, like, super heavyweight behind Andre the Giant, but there's a league between him and Andre because he got lazy for a while. And
There's a case for Yokozuna.
Yoko kind of burned bright and left is the problem. If Yoko had hung around a while longer.
It looks hard to be big.
Like,
the way he lumbers around, like, it looks...
Dude, he flies coach. Like, think about how uncomfortable you are in a plane seat.
Dude, this one time, I used to live in Long Island, which in and of itself is a tragedy, but I was on the Long Island Railroad, and I was having problems with my knee, and there was one seat left, and it was next to a huge guy, like, not a fat guy, but just, like, a huge guy. And I felt really bad, and I sat next to him, and like I already am like a medium large guy-ish, I guess, and I did technically fit, but I felt really bad because I sat down, and then he was like, "Look, I'll get up," and I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, man." He was like, "No, we're both gonna be so uncomfortable," and he just had this like resigned look on his face.
God.
He's like, "I'm just gonna go stand."
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh fuck, man, it is hard to be huge."
No,
And he's
certainly.
probably not getting paid millions of dollars to be huge.
There's only a few jobs for huge guys, it seems like.
I think the Big Show by now maybe doesn't fly coach anymore. And I think at some point he started getting 2 seats.
Well, at some point, he got his own like bus.
Oh, that's right. He got a bus.
In the mid to
but he still had to
2010s,
fly
really.
across
Yeah, that's true.
the ocean.
I have no evidence to this, but I think I would imagine in one of his later contracts he would probably finally have said, "Look, you got to fly me first class. I'm 500 pounds." But I could be wrong. I do know that he got his own bus. In the mid 2010s, it started becoming in vogue for the biggest stars in the WWE to start getting their own tour buses. Not only because it's luxurious and cool, but like then instead of beating your body to a pulp, you're then gonna sit in a car for 6 hours scrunched up.
yeah,
It's like
it's
it's
you
better for your body. It's better for your mental health. If you're making that much money, take care of yourself. And the top stars are making more now than they ever have, with the exception of like the Attitude Era Boom.
Only Brock Lesnar got the private jet, though.
Only Brock Lesnar got the private jet, and then he he left the company shortly after that.
Right.
The first time.
Well, I mean, where are you going to go after you get the private jet?
Well,
Right,
that's part of the reason why they don't want anybody to get that big. You know,
Yeah.
They start making demands like that, and then they can just take all of the fact that you put them over your entire roster, and then they can take all of that heat and leave and go somewhere else.
And I'm sure Vince just feels fucking slighted by that. Like he sees other people's success, and he's like, I should have a bigger part of that.
Apparently, he cried when CM Punk left the company, and I wonder like how much of that is like, oh, like we were friendly and worked together, and how much of it was just like, no, I don't have this thing that I had control over before.
I was making so much money off of his suffering.
Oh yeah, definitely. Both of those, I think. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if Vince didn't see what was wrong with his relationship with CM Punk, because he was paying Punk a lot. According to Punk, he wasn't paying Punk nearly enough, and there's actually a big argument that the guys, even though they're making a lot, should be making way more. It's a whole other story. But he made Punk a millionaire, and he was like, well, what's he complaining about? Why isn't he? He wants to go home. Was he have MRSA? He doesn't need to go home for that, does he?
And I guess that is the essence of Vince McMahon, is just, once again, the inability to understand why anybody else would not be as committed to wrestling as he is, and he is more committed to it, arguably, than anybody who has ever lived, to a point that it seems like it is overwhelmingly negative. Like, it seems like he is, in addition to just being a dark force in the universe in a lot of ways, it seems like Vince McMahon has too much control over the WWE. It
Yeah.
arguably would be more successful if he was able to step back and let other people take control.
Maybe
and-
now.
Yeah,
And it
now.
seems like he's finally starting to realize that, actually. He's put other people somewhat in charge of the main shows, Raw and SmackDown now. He's got Triple H in charge of NXT. He's now mostly focused on restarting the XFL because his ultimate goal now is to defeat the NFL.
Well, the NFL is kind of showing some weakness for the first time in a long time, which was not the case the first time the XFL came up, I might add.
And I'm sure Vince's buddy Trump would love it if he gave the NFL a hit.
I said this last time the XFL came up, but I'll say it again. Even though I know nothing about football, from what I understand from people who know about this kind of thing, the main problem with the XFL the first time around was that it was all the guys who weren't good enough to get into the NFL, and it was basically just like more extremely shot football starring guys who are less good at football than the guys you're used to watching do football.
That was definitely a big part of it. There is more to it than that, but that's definitely a big part of it. And some of the extreme camera stuff the NFL eventually started doing, and they do it now. The XFL had some good ideas, but yeah, the playing was subpar. The teams didn't have enough time to train before the season, and they made the cheerleaders. And I have a lot of respect for cheerleaders. It's very difficult, and the injury
modern
rate is
cheerleading
high.
is insane.
The
Yeah.
main problem was there were no tables randomly strewn about the field for the
Yeah.
players to fall through when trying to catch the ball.
That would have been great. Would have been great.
That's what I thought when I heard Vince McMahon is starting a football league. That's what I envisioned.
Why? Well, and also, why wouldn't it be that? Because what I don't understand is why football? Of all of the other things that Vince McMahon could expand into and destroy, he could have a fucking American Ninja Warrior style course, have one of those shows, something like that. He could do, there's so many other places he could go.
I think it's because of how deeply ingrained football is in Americana, and Vince wants that place for his stuff.
Right.
You
He
know.
just wants it to be like the bosom of what Americans gather around the TV on Thursday or on Thanksgiving to watch Vince McMahon beat the ever-loving shit out of his daughter.
Yeah,
Basically, yeah.
that's the idea.
With footballs this time.
He tried to start a bodybuilding league in the early 90s, the WBF, and it failed miserably. They held one event. I think they published one issue of a magazine that had a bunch of promotional material. He put out a whole line of workout supplements called IcoPro that people say was tasted bad and then gave you the farts.
If you ever thought that the main reason why people watch wrestling is to see beautiful muscular male bodies, this is the proof that is false.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because he thought, maybe people just want to see muscular dudes.
Was there
and
anything?
they failed.
Was there anything different about it from other bodybuilding leagues?
Lex
Well,
Luger.
They had a couple of wrestlers in there, like Lex Luger. But the biggest problem, I think, is that since it was 92, it was right after they made steroids illegal, and it was right when they started investigating Vince McMahon for steroid distribution. So, unlike most bodybuilding, which you can't really keep it clean, WBF was clean. So the guys just weren't quite as impressive looking as mainstream bodybuilders.
Still disgusting.
Still disgusting
The
looking.
adjective beautiful that I used before was not really apt. At least, I don't know, it's a matter of taste, I suppose.
Look at
but
if you want to and I'm saying this sincerely, if you want to see beautiful male bodybuilding pictures, look at old pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger from the 70s. The man was a Greek god or an Austrian
Charles
god. as it
Atlas.
was. Yeah, Charles Atlas.
Was a hottie.
Yeah, but basically all bodybuilders past the late 80s look like if I punctured you with a pin, you'd bleed completely out of your bicep because your skin is stretched so tight overwards. I can't get into it. It's awful. It's awful. And you're not strong. I know strong guys, and they don't look like that. Mark Henry is strong. The Ultimate Warrior wasn't that strong.
Well, it seems like you're not really focusing on your core.
Yeah, right.
Or even your
That's
legs.
where strength actually comes from.
Precisely.
So this seems like a recurring theme for Vince, is that Vince wants to dominate a sport, but the problem with it is that when he enters into it, everybody that he gets is not as good as the guys who are in the main sport, the main body of it.
He seems to think, I guess from his experience in wrestling, he's like, I can take any schlub and turn them into a star. And he thinks he can do that with things that aren't wrestling. But nothing besides wrestling is so much artifice that you can do that.
Also, he can't take any schlub in wrestling and make them a star. He's tried and failed numerous times. All the biggest stars had something about them, or a crazy work ethic, or a great personality, or was enormous, or, they would have made it anyway, with or without him. I mean, that's the big argument. One of the big arguments is, like, who was more important in the rise of the WWF? Was it Vince McMahon or was it Hulk Hogan? Hulk Hogan was the biggest star in wrestling already.
He already had all the ideas, the marketing ideas and all that stuff that really worked. Vince was the guy to give him the go-ahead.
Yeah, and Vince was the guy to be like, oh no, we're going to go nationwide on cable and I'm going to actually compete with the other leagues instead of saying, oh, you know what? You got these towns in a couple of states. I'm just not going to put my show on there because territories, and that way the cartel would stay safe. And I will always endorse Vince McMahon destroying the NWA in the 80s because the NWA was very much a cartel designed for the owners to make money and the wrestlers not to. And they would blacklist people, and they would, if they wanted to screw with somebody, they'd have a promoter say, yeah, come on up, you'll make a lot of money, buy a house. And then the guy would buy a house, and then the promoter would stop booking them. And like Vince can't do stuff like that by design.
Do you think part of how Vince has gotten away with, from our modern perspective, not taking good care of his employees is that when he came to power and when he, took over all of these other promotions in the 80s, the way that he was treating people was so much better by comparison.
Absolutely.
That he was able to just kind of like slide for years because they're like, well, it's so much better than it used to be. You don't even know.
Absolutely. And he treats his wrestlers better now than he did 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, he treated them better than he did 10 years before that.
And even if he treated them the same as the other places, they were making so much money. Much more money with him than anywhere else. And they were getting on TV, and they were getting action figures, and they were getting money off of T-shirts and action figures and stuff like that.
Other wrestling promoters were like, T-shirts? You're a wrestler. You don't need to sell T-shirts. And Hogan was like, well, I have all these T-shirts, and we can make a lot of money. And the promoter was like, oh no, the wrestler's going to make a lot of money. Then they'll have power. Better squash that. And we complain about Vince doing that, but he makes his stars millionaires first. And then tries to not make them billionaires or something. It can't be overstated how awful wrestlers were treated in the territory days by a lot of the promoters.
Vince is also smart enough to do this thing where he'll see a potential money-making avenue, and he won't let the wrestlers do it on their own. He'll make sure that they do it through him. So, for instance, CM Punk was trying to do all this stuff with comic books and like all these different tie-ins to different parts of geek culture. And Vince was kind of like, no, you can't. And then once Punk was gone, or even beforehand, Vince would just do the same thing with someone else. It would just all be licensed through the WWE.
I mean, you were explaining that NXT in general is basically like Vince saying like, there's all this indie wrestling because there's all these people who hate the WWE who are still wrestling fans. So I'll just make a thing that's like that. I still get paid, but then they get to watch a thing that is different from everything else that I make.
And he's savvy enough not to run that himself creatively. Triple H does, and he does a great job. NXT is a great show.
Right, because whenever Vince does take kind of a grassroots thing and make it his own, he just drives it into the ground, and it's not cool immediately.
He got ECW, and he ruined it, and it was really pointed and quickly how he ruined it. He was like, ECW, except we're going to give the championship to the Big Show because all of their guys aren't really stars. And we're going to put Bob Holly and Test on the show because they're tough. And it's like the fans that wanted ECW hated that. And Vince just didn't get it. That was Vince doesn't understand like punk rock. He's a big fan of AC/DC. I like AC/DC, but like if AC/DC is your favorite band in the entire world, it tells you something about how you don't really appreciate the nuance of even like an Iron Maiden versus two bands that sound the same for the last 30 years,
While I'm sure that Vince McMahon in some way thinks of himself as a rebel or the underdog because you kind of have to in our society, especially if you're rich, he hasn't done anything that's particularly rebellious against society in his life, like you're supposed to be a successful cutthroat businessman
I mean, in the Attitude Era, they did have a lot of like family groups and stuff coming after them for their content, and I think he definitely thinks he like.
He also had to paint the fight with WCW as him versus Ted Turner. Even though, like, Turner didn't have that much to do with WCW. He owned the company and all that. But really, he was facing a wing of a large corporate conglomerate run by a guy who doesn't have nearly the power of Ted Turner. But since he thought of it as Ted Turner versus himself, like a great Vince quote was, "I had to go face to face with a billionaire, so I became a billionaire."
Yeah, and he definitely seems like one of these guys who sees himself as embattled by PC culture or something like that, you know. By the way, there's one thing I really got to talk about from the McMahon DVD that WWE put out, just because as a philosopher, it just really irks me. He said once on Raw, as he was like trying to justify some horrible thing he did, well, the means justify the ends, which is a misquote of Machiavelli's "the ends justify the means," which is clearly what Vince meant. Now, not only did he make this mistake on Raw, they play that clip over and over again on the biopic that they put out of him, and no one either like had the balls to tell him that it was wrong or knew enough to say that it was wrong in their entire freaking production machine.
So do you think that he thinks that he's saying it right?
It's gotta be.
Like
which drives me totally insane.
That says it all right there, though, doesn't it? Like
so.
he's just
Right.
he runs
Hey,
the ship.
the means justify the ends, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he runs the ship, and everybody's too afraid to say anything about it to him, and it'll just go out there. And he probably still thinks it's fine. He will go to his grave being like, "The means justify the ends."
The means justify the ends is kind of a great phrase. Everybody I ever knew who was nice to everybody they ever met, and that bit them on the ass, and everybody that they couldn't tell anything unpleasant to, that's what I think of. It's like, but my means were perfect. Yeah, but the result is terrible. So dirty up your means a little bit. Realize we live in like an actual world with nuance here, and come on, man. Okay, I realize you're probably just right.
Spoken like a true Machiavellian.
Yeah, thank you. No problem. Well, if your means are pure all the time, somebody with impure means is going to come and stomp all over you. And
Slam that means right over your head.
Yeah, I'm
like the proverbial steel chair, which, by the way...
You've got to take the world by the throat.
Which, by the way, in the Hell in the Cell match, when Shane accidentally like misses and hits Vince... with the chair to the head, unexposed or unprotected, that shit is brutal.
Yeah. Well,
and I would argue that that sort of thing is the kind of thing that the WWE staff and all of the wrestlers should do when they seize those means that Vince keeps talking about, because I absolutely think that the WWE should be a worker-run cooperative organization.
Well, I don't think the WWE will get to that, but the workers seizing the means is, in a way, what AEW is doing.
Maybe
Really?
that's what Vince thinks means in that quote.
He
thinks
doubt
my
that.
means, my money,
Oh,
justify my ends of wanting to hurt people.
That makes sense. Actually, that I have, this empire that I have built that I need to sustain no matter what.
So AEW, I mean, at the top of AEW is definitely another billionaire. I can't say it. It's not a guy named Tony Khan. I think like his dad owns like an European football league and a baseball team and everything. But like
Jacksonville
Jaguars, that's right. But all the wrestlers that have come together with him say he knows more about wrestling than anybody they've ever met. And essentially the wrestlers that have come together to put this new league up are in charge. Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks and Hangman Page and Cody's wife Brandy. And they're Kenny Omega, right? And their big thrust is we've got to treat the wrestlers better. We got to pay the women wrestlers a lot more. We got to give the guys time off. Even though they're still going to have a year-round schedule, they say they're going to cycle people in and out. A lot of the stuff that people have been saying the WWE needs to do for years for the well-being of their wrestlers, but they're not. They're stopping short of starting a union. But I'm glad to see some progress being made. And if they keep pushing in that direction, and if top talent starts going in that direction, you better believe Vince is going to catch up. because Vince wants the top talent on his show by any means necessary. And if that even means doing right by the wrestlers, he'll find a way in his heart to do it.
If there's a way that he can make money by being a decent human being, he'll even stoop to that.
Well, I always like to point out the WWE has done an excellent job of ethnically integrating their roster over the last 10 years. And I don't believe for a second that it's because they believe in equality amongst people. They want to look like that.
Diversity pays.
You know?
That's the thing,
And I'm happy that they're a diverse company. They've given a lot of opportunities to a lot of non-white people. That's great. But the reasoning behind the means and the ends, right?
Even non-English speaking non-white people
has gotten better. Of course,
so we're going to do an
hired
episode.
Nyla Rose, the enormous trans woman, to be one of the faces of their women's division, and that's much better than Vince being like, well, if we hire a few more black people, then they'll get off my back.
We're gonna talk about Japanese wrestling in an episode or two.
Yeah.
And we're gonna talk about like Japanese wrestling in Japan and in the American Indies versus how it was presented in the WWE for the longest time. And it wasn't good, you know, like
no.
They were racial caricatures.
Vince still thinks of the Japanese as the enemy in World War II.
They're sneaky.
Yeah.
Even Nakamura, even now, where they have Japanese wrestlers who don't even really speak English that well, and like they aren't like complete caricatures. Even Nakamura, since he's turned heel, has been like, you know,
I'm gonna get behind you and punch you in the nuts.
Right in the nuts.
You feel like Vince is back there being like, nah, try to be more sneaky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so I feel like we've covered. We're going to talk about Vince McMahon constantly throughout this podcast.
We didn't talk about the Zach Gowen match.
Yeah, I want to take a few minutes to talk about Zach Gowen and the Zach Gowen match.
Oh, right. You
know,
whatever happened to him? I'd never heard of him before.
So Zach Gowen is a guy that they signed. Well, first, the head of talent relations signed the wrong one-legged wrestler, and that's a story in and of itself. But then they found Zach Gowen. He was an athlete and a wrestler when he was a teenager. They signed him at 19 and immediately put him on television. They were like, this is going to be the most sympathetic babyface we've ever had. Guy with one leg, incredible athlete. They immediately programmed him with Brock Lesnar, who like brutalized him. And it worked. It got a ton of sympathy. Vince programmed him with himself. They had that match where Zach kicked him in the face with that chair, and they immediately went home.
Vince was holding the chair with the wrong side facing him. So when Zach Gowen kicks it, the seat opens up into Vince's temple, and you see blood just spurting out. It's not the normal bleeding from the forehead that you usually see. It's just like spurting out of the side of his head.
It was unintentional. It was
definitely.
Yeah, hard way, as we call it in wrestling. He was busted open hard way, because the easy way is you take a really sharp blade, and I'm not killing any secrets here, you take a really sharp blade, make a small cut on your brow, maybe you take an aspirin or two before the show to thin your blood, and then you close your mouth and you breathe out until your face is red and it starts pouring out. Like, that's the easy way. The hard way is steel meets bone and blood spurts everywhere.
And Vince didn't miss a beat. He finished the match,
of course
won the match.
Yeah.
And then, you know.
But to answer your question about what happened with Zach Gowen is apparently Zach Gowen was, like teenage boys will be, a horrible egomaniac who lied to everybody about everything and couldn't just keep himself together. And they let him go within another year because he was impossible to work with. He's still wrestling, and by all accounts, he's a lot better now as a person. But that's what happens to a lot of people between the ages of 20 and 35.
I think the problem with a character like that is, you know, because everyone sees them as having a disadvantage, it's hard to keep having them beat people because it makes the people that they beat look weak. And if they get beaten, well, it doesn't do anything for the people who beat them. It's the problem that they have when they have a 2-on-1, that it's never that interesting because either the one beats the two and makes them look like chumps, or the two beat the one and who cares. So, you know, again, it's wrestling, so you can have the wrestlers basically have superpowers so that the one-legged guy can overcome everyone else.
And he pulls off... Oh, sorry.
But it stretches your credulity a little bit, I think.
He pulls off some really impressive-looking stuff in that match, Zach Gowen. Like, he seems skilled. I am invested in it for a little bit while it's going on. And then, you know, it does the thing where, like, Vince beats him, and he beats him, and he beats him, and then there starts to be a comeback a little bit, and you're thinking, and obviously, and I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, well, there's no way that Vince is going to win this match, right? That's obviously what they're setting up. And then when I start realizing, like, oh, okay, I guess maybe Vince is going to win this match, and then once again, it just turns into Vince just beating the shit out of a guy with one leg.
Exactly.
And and it's like, I know he's trying to be the villain, and I get that, but there's a point at which it's just a bummer. There's a point at which where it's like,
the
it's
same
not
with Stephanie.
Yeah, exactly.
And neither of those angles, by the way, are critically acclaimed or did very good business.
And
They're memorable, but like a lot of awful stuff is memorable.
Yeah.
We're probably going to have a similar conversation about intergender wrestling eventually, but at least in that case, like, there's women like China classically, but even now,
Jordan Grace, perhaps.
Jordan Grace, right? Who look like they could take, at least the smaller dudes, at least the cruiserweights.
Yeah.
But I mean, wrestling doesn't always have to be believable. The WWE, at least based on the principles that they've already sort of laid out, you can't get too cartoony. You can't get too far away from something that someone would actually believe could be a real fight. But, there's room for it. You just gotta find the right context, I suppose. Also along those lines, now AEW had a show with a no-legged wrestler.
Oh yeah, he's touring, doing the gimmick where he goes into battle royals. No legs, no feet. No feet. Your feet can't hit the floor. Huh?
All right.
Of course,
All right,
then they
that's
just
awesome.
throw him out and his nubs hit the floor and they send him to the back.
Have you seen any like full matches with him?
No, I met him briefly, just like handshake backstage at the Collective. But I'm all for it. Like, it's performance art, man. If you want to, like, you can take whatever disability that you have, you can fit yourself into wrestling. There's an independent wrestler named Gregory Iron who has cerebral palsy. One of his arms doesn't really work very well, and he teams with Zach Gowen as the handicapped heroes. They do inspirational speeches and wrestle.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Because especially, I mean, this is a sport where ability should really not count as much.
Dustin
Not as-
Thomas.
Dustin Thomas, that's him.
Like,
Yeah,
there's no reason for wrestling to not be inclusive of people of all levels of ability because,
Well,
it's
you need to be
largely
able to
fictitious.
execute the things, but I get what you're saying. Whoever would actually win, look, we know what a real fight looks like. You want to watch a real fight? Watch UFC. That is real fighting by people who have studied a number of disciplines.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the thing with Zach Gowen is, if you're going to be the one-legged guy who they put over everyone, the crowd better fucking love you.
Right.
You better be a great character, super charismatic, and get that over that they really want you to beat all those people. Then it works, right? Otherwise, you get into the situation where when the heels are beating on them, it's like not really fun to watch
Yeah.
at all. And then, there's a ceiling to how much they can win because the crowd doesn't want to see them beat their favorites.
There's a difference
cetera.
between being an underdog and being someone who just shouldn't be in the fight. It's why they call a little league game off and one team gets up by 12 points. It's like, okay.
these kids are just gonna have a bad night. Like, let's not make this any worse.
When I was in junior high school, I went to a basketball game at the gym of my junior high school, and like our team won by like 40 points or something, and I realized halfway through the game the visiting team had no substitutes. Like, it was the same 5 guys playing for an hour, and a team from our school had our full roster of players. They were swapping people in and out like you were supposed to, and I'm like, oh, these guys must be really tired by the end. And like, we won, cool, but it didn't really seem fair to me.
No, yeah, it's hard to feel good about that victory.
Yeah.
It's like when you beat a child at Monopoly and it's only like kind of satisfying.
Yeah,
like,
only
it's
kind of.
satisfying.
Oh, sure.
You taught them some expectations for life. So the next episode, I'm not sure what the bad match is going to be, but since the start of this podcast, Ben has been badgering me to watch a match, the Joe Kobashi match.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, from Ring of Honor in 2005.
Samoa Joe versus one of the greatest Japanese wrestlers of all time. One of the greatest wrestlers of all time, Kenta Kobashi. One of the few matches he had in America.
And Doc and I were both there live for that one, too.
Yeah.
I do know what the bad match is.
Oh, all right. Let's hear it.
It is Kenzo Suzuki versus Billy Gunn
Uh,
from sometime in 2004 in the WWE.
uh,
So that will be an interesting contrast.
This has been Contesting Wrestling. You should follow us on Twitter, ContestingW. Support our Patreon at patreon.com/contestingwrestling, where we put
You
out...
can put money in there.
Yes.
Please
you can,
do.
Yeah, please put money
Doc
all in there.
needs new scarves.
And then if you put money in there, what's great is that you get bonus episodes, you get watch-alongs.
we'll put up some of our masters so you can hear us stuttering and saying,
That'll be. I thought about making a supercut of all of the vocal noises that I cut out of the episodes. That just 10 minutes of the three of us going.
So you can look forward to that.
We'll
Yeah.
rub the mic just on our beards the whole time.
Yeah, it'll be like ASMR. It's basically we're launching a whole ASMR YouTube channel.
That makes you itchy.
Oh yeah, we'll have this. We are talking about a Twitch channel where we play through the last 20 years of wrestling video games. So that'll happen. It's all kinds of good shit. My name is Evan Burke. You can follow me on Twitter at Evan Burke, etc. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. It's all the same thing. And you can find my writing at evanburke.biz.
My name, once again, is Doc Diamondfire. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Diamondfire. That's at Dr. Diamondfire. I am available for bookings for wrestling and for commentary, for ring announcing, if you like the sound of my voice or my delivery. At me, book me. I'm a very good commentator, and I would like to do it on your show.
I'm Dr. Ben Abelson. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at ScribeBen. And I have some writings on academia.edu if you partake in such internet places.
Alrighty, this has been Contesting Wrestling. Thank you very much.